Hey guys, okay, working on this 1992 Ford F600 today, and specifically we're going to be removing, rebuilding with a bunch of different O-rings that I will put in the description, or I might just tell you, whatever works. We'll be rebuilding these emergency brake actuators. There's one on each side of the truck. Anyone who has this truck has obviously seen this and knows how they can be an issue. My particular case, there is obviously a leak on the internal, one of the internal O-rings, and it's leaking into the brake area. So we got to get that fixed. You'll also sometimes find they leak right here. That'd be your main O-ring leaking. So like I said, we're gonna do a full rebuild of this. These things are very expensive to buy from Ford, as many people may know. In Canada, I got quoted $1,100 each plus install for one of these. So that's for the whole unit, not rebuild. That's a new or possibly rebuilt by Ford unit, but from the Ford dealership. So we definitely want to avoid that. You can actually repair these for, I want to say, between $10 and $15, which is just the cost of the O-rings and obviously your time. So I'll just go over quickly how this system works. You can skip ahead if you like, if you know how it works, but just for the people that don't know, simplistically, and maybe I'll put a diagram on top of this voiceover or whatever here just to show you, because I have the service manual. But basically, when you get into the truck and you want to drive away, your parking brake is obviously on. You want to deactivate your parking brake. So you press the yellow button on the dash, and what that does is activates a pump in the engine compartment, and it pumps ATF fluid, automatic transmission fluid, the red stuff, through this line. There's one on each side. I've already removed that side. There it is right there. It pumps fluid through this line, and imagine this being like sort of like a little hydraulic piston with a spring behind it. So when the parking brake is actuated, which means the parking brake is on, the spring is doing all the work. The spring is pushing a rod and pushing a wedge into your parking brake cylinder, which is expanding the brake shoes and holding the vehicle in place. When you want to drive away, like I said, you press your yellow button, turns the pump on, starts pumping hydraulic fluid into this chamber via this hose, and it pushes with hydraulic pressure that spring back this way out of the way, in turn pulling back the rod and the wedge, which frees up your brake shoes and allows you to drive away. Okay, there's a couple different steps you could take first. This is how I do it. It just seems to be, an all right way to do it. So first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna break the line that goes from the pump. So we're gonna disconnect that. Just have a little bucket there. So that's gonna be 1 inch wrench here. Now this is a super helpful tip. We just broke it loose. What I've got here is a 5/8 JIC cap. Just picked up my local hydraulic store. This will keep you from losing a whole bunch of ATF fluid for no reason. So you can see I've cracked it. It's coming out there. So I'm going to take this off. And I'm going to immediately put that cap on. Sometimes mine happens to be a flexible hose. On my passenger side, it's a stiff, like metal hose. It still has some place, but it's just going to be a little tighter. So it's totally doable, whether it's the rubber or the metal. Okay, next you've got this bleeder valve on the top here. I'm going to put a wrench on it, and I'm going to just crack it, because it has to come out in order to get this sort of system off, because when you start to rotate it, it'll hit the axle. So you got to crack that. I always do that sort of first or second in the steps, just because it has to come out. So I don't want to get too ahead of myself and then it not come out. So I'm just going to undo that. You definitely want to chock the vehicle so it can't roll, because in a second here we're actually going to be mechanically compressing that spring, which will disengage your parking brake. So the vehicle will roll away if it's on a grade or it's not chalked. Okay, so remove that. That's what that looks like. It's got a little O-ring on there. We'll get into all these O-rings when we do the rebuild. And also keep track of your right and left side. You know, at the end of the day, it probably doesn't matter, but it's always nice to put the same things back in the same spots. I'm just gonna give this a quick wipe here. So I'm gonna remove it as well. So this is a JIC fitting, 90-degree JIC fitting. So we're gonna crack that loose. I'm working with limited tools here because I'm just out in the field. So you just gotta use what you have. Once we get back to the shop, I'll have some more proper tools. So we'll loosen that. And then I don't think it will come all the way out because you'll hit the wheel, but could be wrong. No, we just had enough. So that's what that fitting looks like. And I probably will replace the whole fitting. However, if you can't find that fitting, I will give you the spec for that O-ring there. Because if this is in good shape, I suppose there's no real reason to replace it. Okay, so now what we're gonna do is we're gonna compress that spring like I talked about, and the way you do that is by turning this nut on the back counterclockwise. So when you start, it'll have no resistance, it'll be coming out pretty smoothly, depending on the corrosion. And I don't recommend using power tools on this. Maybe a drill would be fine, but nothing impact. I just don't think it would be good for the seals. I mean, I guess we are replacing it, but you know, it's one of these things where I'd probably just use a wrench, or like I said, I'm working with minimal tools, so I'm using this 3/4 open end. The ultimate tool is a 3/4 ratcheting end wrench, because this shock is in the way of getting any power tools in there. So I've backed that out till I know I'm on the spring, because I can't turn it by hand anymore. So now what I'm doing is I'm going to start compressing that spring. And this is pretty slow if you don't have proper tools, but you can hear the wedge. Hopefully you can hear that. You can hear the wedge backing out of the wheel cylinder. And I'm actually disengaging my brakes. You can actually hear it now. And because I've got the other side off, you'll actually feel, or maybe you'll see the vehicle roll here against the chocks, just that little bit. Okay, so I'm not gonna totally bottom the spring out, like compress it completely, because all we have to do is get it loose enough that it pulls that, or it's not putting any pressure on the pin, which is pushing the wedge in. So next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna loosen the jam nut that's holding this whole unit in. So here's the other side. This is a jam nut right here. So here's the cylinder. This is a jam nut. It screws in clockwise and then tightens down. And this thread screws into the backing plate of the brakes. So what we're gonna do right now is we're gonna loosen the locking nut, or the jam nut, and then we're gonna spin this whole unit counterclockwise out of the vehicle. So I'm getting in behind here with, I've just got a large pair of channel locks. I've seen guys use large open-end wrenches or dedicated wrenches that are the right size. I don't know the size right off the bat here, but this does work. Oh, there we go. So there's the jam nut loose. And you'll see as I rotate this, fluid is going to come out. Basically, we're just dumping that cylinder out. And then we're going to spin the whole thing out of the vehicle. Also, if you feel any resistance to it coming out, it means you're still pushing on the pin. So you're going to have to back this spring up or compress this spring a little bit more. Okay, so that's what, so you can see that's the area that that thing screws into. And this is the rod that you're pushing on. You're basically pushing on the end of this rod, and on the other end of this rod is literally a wedge-shaped piece of metal, and it wedges the brake open. So mine, apparently, according to the inspector, was leaking out that tube into this area here on the other side. So we're doing both sides just so I don't have to worry about it again for hopefully a couple of years. And if you notice, so I've got both of them out in the light here. There shouldn't be any fluid in this compartment. This should be pretty dry, or dry. So we definitely have a leak in actually both of them. This one's a little bit more minor, but it is definitely leaking, and you'll see what seal it's leaking by once we take this apart. Okay, and then one other thing I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna mark the left and right sides right now, because this top is gonna come off and so is this. I just don't want everything getting mixed up. So for me, the left driver's side is going to be one mark here. And this is also where I'll line everything up when I put it back together. And the right will be two. Okay guys, so I got it sort of pre-clean stage. This is that jam nut I was talking about. You can see everything a little bit better. I've got this backed out. So the spec on it, as I showed you in the video, is it's a 2 to 2.12 or something like that, basically between this plate and the bottom of this nut. I've got it about 1.75 inches. That's enough in my particular case, and probably your case as well. You're basically just trying to get the spring tension off of the bottom plate here, and that'll make a little bit more sense when we take it out. But the next step here is going to be to remove these bolts, and we're gonna actually, because there's been silicone put on here to stop it from leaking at the back, which I don't really recommend, but someone's done it. So I'm gonna press it out, and the silicone's probably gonna be binding a little bit. If you have any doubts about the integrity of this release bolt, by that I mean if you're worried about it actually caging the spring properly or not, then I would highly suggest putting this in a vise, or at least clamping it, because once you remove these bolts, that spring has up to 2,000 pounds of load behind it, pushing these two halves apart. So definitely be careful, wear eye protection. Okay, so I got a 1/4 inch hex. Just gonna clean all these out, blow them out with some air. Okay, so now what we're going to be doing is we're going to be pushing this backing plate off here with the spring assembly by pushing on the rod socket. So you can hammer on it, whatever, but I'm going to use a little bit more controlled method. I'm going to use this, this pushing tool here. I'm going to put this nut back on. And I'm going to grab onto the nut. You can see it coming out here. As I'm bottomed out on my tool here, I'm just going to put this socket in here to push it. Okay, so what I like to do right away is relieve some of the tension on this spring just so it's not so torqued out. Okay, so now here's your main O-ring. And then this is what they call the bearing. It's not a bearing, it's just a bearing surface for the O-ring to go onto. And the seal kit for this comes with it, but you don't need it because it's usually in good shape. It's meant to be split like that so you can get it on. And it goes on with the rounded part like that, flat part against the O-ring. That's actually like a hard plastic. So that's ready to be cleaned up. Basically, there's the end of the rod socket that pushes on your wedge assembly on your brake cylinder. There's the release bolt. So the release bolt has this nut locked onto the end, and then the other end of the nut, or other end of the bolt, is actually in this tube, the tube of the main cylinder. It's in this tube, and it's held in place by the back of this metal unit. And then this rod socket is actually just pressed into the end. So this piece can come off if you need to totally disassemble the unit. So there's no seals or anything in here that you need to replace. One thing to note, this little washer here is supposed to have holes in it, and then you'll see behind it there's a little foam sort of filter. And all that's there for is that when the hydraulic fluid pushes this, air has to escape from this chamber, or else it would build up in here and cause issues. It escapes out through that filter and out through the hole, so you never want to plug that, and you want to make sure your filter's clean and in good shape. because when it goes back, it's obviously sucking outside air in, and there's usually dust in this area because it's near your back tires. So that's what the filter's there for when it decompresses the spring. You don't want it sucking in dirty air. Okay, so we can take, actually no, we'll leave that on. There's our socket. Okay, so if you look down in here, see that white ring right there? This one's a little different than some, of the other more common ones. So there's a snap ring in there holding that white bushing in place. Let me show you the other side. This is the cylinder, piston, whatever you want to call it, from the other side. This one came out of there. It's pressed in like this. And if you see these little tabs, those little tabs just grab onto the edges of that hole once it's seated in place, and that's how it's held in there. So you literally put it like that and then you press it into place. That's pretty good. You're limited to how many times you can use this, but I mean, as long as it's being held in there relatively well, you should be okay. But on this one, there's a clip down in there. So let's get that clip out. So I'm just going to use these snap ring pliers. So I just compressed it and then pulled it out. So now we can push that out this way. And the easiest way to do that I found is I get a 24 mil socket, drop it right down in there. It sits on it. And then I use that same pusher here to push the bushing out. And you want to make sure it's coming out pretty easily, and then that's all it took. I just turned it a couple of turns. There it is there. You can see the socket poking through. So the bushing's actually the exact same. See, it's got those little tabs. So this bushing is meant to go in the two different styles of these. The only difference is this particular one had the snap ring. So if you look here, this is the bushing and the O-ring from the right-hand side. They're in essentially pristine condition on the inside. So probably nothing was leaking by them. If anything, there was stuff leaking by this outside one. It does have a tiny, tiny amount of abrasion and flat spot to it, but it probably wasn't leaking anything, if at all. Like, it probably wasn't leaking at all, but we're replacing it because it's good to do both sides at once. The side we just removed, however, if you look, I haven't touched anything, but I don't know if the camera will pick this up, but it's all good, it's all round. And then right here in this area, there's a chunk right out of it. So right there, something happened where there was some abrasion, and basically fluid was allowed to pass by there. And then, let's see this one. This one's in pretty good, it's pretty good. They feel a little bit harder than the other side. They're definitely harder. So they could have been nitrile 90 when you should have been using nitrile 70. But who knows? But regardless, this is definitely the one that had the most leak, and you can tell why, because there's that little messed up spot on the O-ring. So let's get those out of there. Yeah, they're definitely a lot harder material than the other side. And then we'll just pull that outside one off. And that bushing looks like it's in good shape. Okay, so all I'm gonna do now is clean all these parts up again with some cleaner diesel fuel, then brake cleaner, and then depending on what the insides of these look like, I may hone them out, but we'll see after I clean it how bad they look, and then we'll come back once it's time for assembly. Here's another quick thing. So I'm just giving all of you guys this information just so you have as much information as possible, you know, because there are different styles of these things. Not everyone's is gonna be the same. So this is the driver's side bushing. I still have the O-ring on it. So driver side, passenger side. This is the one that had the ring. And you can see it's almost like it was made to have the ring because it ends up being about the same height or just slightly higher than the passenger side one. So I'm thinking that this one was made to have this snap ring on it. And this one was made to use those clips no matter what. But I guess we'll see once we install whether there is room or not to put a snap ring on this one. Okay, I was gonna use a cylinder hone. I got them all wire wheeled and everything. I'm actually just gonna use this, what is it, 400 grit sandpaper, a little bit of motor oil, and just go in and take off any rough spots. So just kind of sort of like you would be honing a cylinder, sort of circular motions, making a crosshatch pattern. I know it's not going to be perfectly like a cylinder hone. The only reason I didn't use the hone is because it's actually not a perfect cylinder. It's got that little protrusion right there where the fitting comes in, so you can't get a full-size hone in there. So I'm just going to use this. I'm basically just trying to take off any high spots, rough spots, chips in the paint, so that O-ring slides in smooth. Okay guys, back at it. Finally received all the O-rings in the mail. I made this little sheet, so you can screenshot that. That is all the O-rings you're going to require. I've got where they go, the nominal size, actual size, metric, and what the material is. I'm going to go through each one. Might be boring for people that don't care, but for people who are rebuilding this, will be super helpful. So I guess the first one would be the large O-ring. I happened to get this one from the O-ring store in the States, United States. So the nominal size. So I also got these sizes from, might be worth noting, this is the service kit that you can buy. It's very hard to find, and when you do find it, it's somewhat expensive. But if you can find this kit, it'll save you a lot of time searching. But I shouldn't say a lot of time. I mean, finding these is easy enough online. But if you can find this service kit, it will help you out a little bit. The nice thing about it is it does come with this big zip tie here, which you will need. I'm going to be using 2 small zip ties, does the same thing. This super lube, I use this stuff a lot. I actually have a big container of it. It's specifically made for O-rings. It's food grade, it's clean, it's clear. It's great for reassembling things that have O-rings. It comes with a tube of that. That tube, I've had the small tube of that stuff before, and it literally lasts like 5 years. It comes with a new bushing, which is fairly important if your bushing's damaged, but if they're in good shape, you don't really need that. Anyway, I got the sizes for my O-rings from this sheet, and that's how I arrived at the sizes that I did. There's one sort of specific one that I'll get into here in a second, which is very difficult to find if you don't get it in this kit. So anyway, let's get in it. So we got the large O-ring here. I found mine at the O-ring store. This happens to be a food grade one. It really means nothing other than it's, you know, FDA approved for whatever reason if you're using it for a food grade application, but it's all they had in stock, so I picked it up. The biggest thing you're going to be looking for is that it's 4.5 inch ID by 1/4 inch cross section. That's how O-rings are measured. And for this one, you're going to want nitrile 70. So you're looking for that. Basically, it's nitrile 70, nitrile 90. 90 is going to be a little bit harder, and it's made for different applications, which we'll get into in a second. So 70 is softer, good for this up and down one here that travels a lot, and it's a good big size. Next one is the insert bushing outside. So this is the insert bushing. The outside O-ring here is this one. I got these ones as well from the O-ring store. And I mean, I have like a lifetime supply here. So once you buy these once, you're pretty much good for life. So this one is 1 5/16 ID by 3/32 cross section. This one's pretty easy to find. These ones happen to be green. They got some kind of compound that makes them more resistant to fluids and things like that. But as long as they're black, and again, nitrile 70 is what you're looking for, is the most important thing. So I'll just take out one of those now, actually. I'll take out one of these big ones, get it ready. Okay, next we have the insert bushing inside. So those the O-rings that go on the inside of this. They are super specific and kind of oddball, meaning the cross section on them is 5/32. So anybody that knows O-rings knows they go up in 1/16 increments normally. I'm not saying they don't make this. It is extremely difficult to find. There's only one company in the States that makes this, and I had to buy like 300 of them to meet their order minimum. And it's just not required because you can find a metric equivalent that I think actually works better. So if you can find the right one, it is 1 inch ID by 5/32 cross section. That's the actual size. I measured the ones that came out, and I also took the metric actual from these measurements here, and you get 24.765, blah, 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 whatever. Long story short, the closest metric that I think works perfectly is 25 millimeter inside diameter by 4.5 millimeter cross section. They are also difficult to find, but at the same time, the O-ring store or wherever I think I got it from, oringsandmore.com. Very easy to find on a place that specializes in O-rings. Could not find at any of the O-ring stores the 5/32 cross section. That's how hard those are to find. But anyway, this is the equivalent. Works very well. 25 millimeter by 4.5 millimeter nitrile 70 is the one you're looking for, and you're going to require 2 of those per side or per unit here. So we'll take 2 of those out, get those ready. Next one is the 90-degree JIC fitting. So there's an O-ring that goes on this ORB fitting here. That's super standard. Any hydraulic store should know off the top of their head what the size of this is. It's a very common O-ring. So I bought a whole bunch of them just to have them. This one happens to be from Gallagher Fluid Seals in the United States. Great company to deal with. Actually, all these companies were great to deal with. Super quick shipping, even to Canada. I had everything within 2 days. So you're going to require one of those, and it is really I don't know what the nominal size is, but it's 0.755 ID by 0.097 cross section. But regardless, it's a standard O-ring Boss fitting O-ring. So keep that out. Next, you're going to require 2. Actually, no, we'll do the jam nut. Okay, so next you're going to require 1 for the jam nut. So that's the O-ring that goes on this little sleeve right here. And that is going to be 1 5/16 ID by 3/32 cross section. And I got that from Gallagher Fluid Seals. So take one of those out. Oh, and that's going to be nitrile 70 as well. I don't know if I mentioned, the one that goes on the hydraulic fitting is going to be nitrile 90. It's a little harder for applications where you're like screwing it into something and it's compressing. So that's going to be a nitrile 90. And then last, you're going to require 2 of the these little guys here. So one is for the bleeder. It goes right there. And the other is for the cap or nut, whatever you want to call it. Goes there. And that is going to be a 0.301 ID by 0.064 cross section. And you're going to require 2, and I got it from Gallagher Fluid Seals. And it is also a nitrile 90, so a little harder because it is in one of those compression applications. Okay, so we're going to get back into the reassembly. So I cleaned everything up, as you can see. I painted the outsides. The insides I sort of cleaned out a little bit with that sandpaper. So what I'm going to use for assembly is this stuff. I'm just going to sort of coat all the surfaces and the O-rings with it, just a little, very light amount. If you don't have this, actually the Ford service manual says you can just use ATF. So in a portion of this, I will just be pouring a little bit of ATF fluid, automatic transmission fluid, into here just so everything slides in nice. But in some portions I may use this. So for now, I'm gonna use this to install our bushing. So make sure everything's nice and clean, obviously. You got a nice clean work surface. Just going to apply some of this onto here, and that's going to be this green O-ring. So we'll slide that on there. And then I'm just going to lube up this spot here. You just want everything to slide in nice with no chance of it nicking any sharp edges and damaging it without you knowing. Is probably the worst thing that could happen. So by applying a little bit of lubricant, and then here I'm just putting it in just so there's no rust, because really there should be no fluid in this area after we install. So you want to have something in there instead of just raw metal. So got some lube in there. And then while we're at it, we might as well install the 2 interior O-rings. Just one. Okay, so this is the one without that little C-clip. I opted to not use the, not to find a C-clip. I used it on the other one just because it had it, but I think this will hold in place fine. And I'm also not going to be using any sealant in this area. There's a couple guys online that did use sealant in this area here because it's a static O-ring, so I kind of understand the idea behind it. But at the same time, O-rings are meant to receive pressure and then do their sealing. So if you were to silicone this in place with whatever RTV sealant or some kind of approved sealant for, you know, this type of fluid, you'd effectively, you know, put it on, put it in this housing here, let it dry overnight or whatever it takes to dry. And if this is sort of out of whack or whatever, you know, it could leave voids and things like that and actually cause a leak in itself. So I'm just going to leave it just the raw O-ring. I'm going to put this back together and have it work the way it was supposed to work, the way it was designed to work. So that's just my thinking. But at this point, this is the time when you could put sealant on here if you felt like that was the right thing to do. So I'm just going to place that in there with the little tabs up. Goes in pretty easy with the lubricant. And then probably just for the last little bit, I'm going to use that 24mm socket. Yeah, it's right down in there. So we're good. Okay, so next I'm just going to pour a little bit of automatic transmission fluid into that area there. Just because this is the part that I want to be super lubricated. So I'm going to make sure it gets on all the walls of this. And let a little bit go onto that O-ring. Just put that off to the side. Okay, so next we're going to be working on the actual piston. And this is where the bearing goes. So back onto here, as long as it's in good condition. And then this is where the large O-ring sits. Okay, and this is where you want to hold this bearing from, so it'll try to, if you just push it in like this, the white O-ring will push down and try to push the bearing out of the way before it gets into the housing. So that's what these zip ties are for. One big zip tie would be ideal, but I'm just going to use these two. So we're going to put that together and put it on here. And I'm just tightening it down. It doesn't be crazy tight because you're just trying to keep it from expanding, and it's right on that bearing. So this O-ring's clean and lubed up, ready to go in. And I'm just going to make sure there is some lubricant on this because this is sliding into that double O-ring spot. So you really want that to not nick and tear or do anything. So make sure that's all lubed up. And then we're going to take our housing, and we got those notches we made. Sure, here, and got the two on there. Okay, so I'm just gonna straight as possible start that one. Okay, so that was the end of the piston going into that first O-ring, and then this is where you need to apply pretty good amount of force. I'm going to use a clamp. And it doesn't have to be like some crazy clamp. This is just a cheap Princess Auto clamp. It's just to get that to overcome the pressure. So I'll make sure it's going in straight. Okay, so this is probably the time to remove this zip tie. Okay, got it in there. I mean, it's a pretty tight fit, but once you get it past the holes, it does go a little smoother. You just got to try your best to not tear it on those holes, but I mean, it's really hard to know. But you know, if you just go in straight, you should be okay. Okay, I've just got it in my vise here. It's got, my vise has a pipe thing. I've got the pipe on the other, and I'm just using these big oil filter grippers, pliers to line the holes up here before I push it all the way in. Basically, you want these to go in with absolutely no resistance or very little. Do this one. And the reason this part's going in crooked is because the spring actually makes it crooked depending on how it's retracted. So it's not like the O-ring's going in crooked, it's just this top cap is. So it shouldn't be too much of a worry as far as the O-ring's concerned. Okay, there is a torque spec on this. I don't have the manual right in front of me, but they don't have to be super tight. They're basically just acting as pins, and you gotta keep in mind they're going into a pretty thin spot with not a lot of threads, so they don't need to be insanely tight. Okay, put this jam nut O-ring on. This one's literally just to keep dust out, so it's not super, super critical, but it's good that it's there. And this is more just for ease of installation and to keep rust from happening. Okay, so this is actually sitting in the vehicle like this, the right-hand side. So our bleeder's gonna go at the top. And these I'll just leave loose because you can't install it with them in. We'll have to put them in once this is installed. Another small O-ring on the cap. I believe you can install completely. And this has to be just threaded in loosely because it has to come out as well. Okay, so that's ready to go into the vehicle. I'll just clean it with a little bit of brake fluid on the outside. And yeah, that should be good to go. Okay, so I'm just screwing it in here and I'm not really keeping an eye on how many times it turns in because I did the other side and basically you just turn it until it bottoms out, which was right around that 7 turn mark, and then you back it out till your fitting, your hydraulic fitting will go on. So I think they figured that out already. Okay, so there, you can't tighten it in anymore, and I've got the jam nut backed all the way off. So there's still threads exposed, and then what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna turn it to about that position there where that can go on. You're gonna install the bleeder. And you'll see it coming out there. That's just from gravity, so I'll close that. And then we just got to tighten down the jam nut. Go. Okay, now we just got to fill up the reservoir and bleed it, and we should be good to go.